I visited Kenya in September 2007 to see my cousin. My cousin and I had been very close. We were closer than brothers and shared a lot of the same passions. The main passion we shared together was a strong allurement to adventure. We were never wary of throwing caution to the winds in order to have that moment of a lifetime experience, and boy, did we have some. We had planned an epic tour. My cousin was a doctor in one of the more prestigious medical schools in Nairobi and had been invited to the famous Masai Mara Game Reserve to do a presentation to new ranger recruits. He was requested to provide training on dealing with various injuries and medical concerns in the bush, from wildfires, bee stings, snake bites, and even gore injuries from animals like Cape buffalo, nicknamed Black Death by the locals. My cousin made a deal with the head game warden in the country. If he were to give this presentation, he'd want himself and me to have free entry to the game park and to accompany the head game warden on a wildlife tour. He told me what he had planned, and I was over the moon. I've never been so excited in my life and naturally was pumping my fists at such a prospect. Before getting into how this story relates to jinns, I'd like to set the scene and atmosphere here. We had gone to the Mara to see the Great Migration. The Great Migration is the annual movement of millions of animals from the Serengeti in Tanzania to Kenya, crossing over the crocodile-infested Mara River. It is one of the most amazing spectacles in the world, and I was lucky enough to witness it. We stayed the first night in the Mara Serena, one of the best game lodges in the Masai Mara, and I remember that night distinctly. We had just entered the room, and I had opened the back window which faced the open plains of the game reserve. We started praying Maghreb, and suddenly, while praying, we heard what only every wildlife lover dreams of hearing. It was a male lion roaring in the distance. Both our hearts stopped that night as we were mesmerized. We didn't blink. We didn't say anything. We just listened and absorbed it. The next day, we went to actually see the migration and saw every animal under the sun, from elephants to lions to hyenas to hippos. To my delight, we were told later that day that we would be spending our last night at a campsite, and that's when things started to get really interesting. My cousin and I had come back from spending time with a top documentary director from Zimbabwe, driving to the outer edges of the Mara to see the extent of the migration. However, in the middle of the night, we were dropped off a quarter-mile from the hotel by a mutual friend in the middle of the bush and asked to walk to the Serena for dinner. We thought, okay, no problem, we know the way. What's the worst that could happen? We started our walk and quickly realized how stupid that idea was. We couldn't see anything, and we were walking on a road with bushes about 10 feet tall on each side. We didn't know what could be hiding in it waiting for us. Worst of all, we had no light except my cell phone. We were pretty excited though still. The adrenaline was pumping, and the only thought in our heads was what a tale this would make back home, so we continued to walk. We finally arrived at the Serena about 15 minutes later and had dinner. While we were eating, we were told that an elephant stood between us and our campsite, so we might have to sleep in an open car in the middle of the Mara. We raced back in hopes we could somehow scare the elephant away so we could sleep. At that point, I don't know what seemed worse, trying to scare an elephant or sleeping in an open car knowing that we had heard a lion the previous night. Luckily, by the time we got the campsite, the elephant had moved on, so we were able to sneak into our tent. As soon as we got back into our tent, the elephant came back. At night, we could see the shadows of animals on our tent. We heard elephants breaking branches, and we also saw the outlines of hippos. Suddenly, just before dozing off, I heard the same lions again, except they sounded closer. When I woke up the next morning, I saw my cousin visibly disturbed. I asked him what happened, and he said that he couldn't get a whiff of sleep. I failed to understand why, but what he told me made no sense. He said that something had been in the tent with us that night. He insisted it was a jinn. He had frightening dreams and felt a presence. This seemed so odd to me. We had gone through an entire ordeal with anything but jinns, so why is he having this thought? My cousin had been a military doctor and had seen his fair share of frightening scenes. It seemed out of the blue. When I had some time later that morning, I thought about it a bit more. It made sense from an Islamic perspective. We are taught by Islamic tradition that jinns like to live in desolate places far away as possible from human disturbance, and the Mara is as wild as it gets. I couldn't completely discount the fact that something else other than the local wildlife was hanging around us. It was entirely possible. Later, we discussed this with the locals, and they told us how much the belief in jinn is instilled into the culture. Black magic and white magic is also practiced frequently. I was told witch doctors were very powerful and had control of entire villages. They are called mganga in Swahili. Because of this, we decided to take our Kenya trip in a different fashion. We heard that the port city of Mombasa, almost 500 kilometers from Nairobi, was famous for its black magic and jinn stories, so we took a detour. When we arrived, the first thing I saw before entering the city was a huge sign saying Maganga. It was an advertisement for a witch doctor, and it even had a phone number. The city was indeed living up to its reputation. It didn't stop there. In fact, when we got to the hotel, we were asked to not stand near the water at night. Why? It's because of the hadith of the Prophet SAW, where he said, "The jinn are of three kind, one of them being those who dwell in the oceans." Later that day, my cousin had gone out to visit family, leaving me in the hotel, which was right by the Indian Ocean, alone. I decided to go down to the beach and take a quick peek at how it is at night. When I was heading to the beach and about to take the steps down onto the sand, I felt a hand grab my shoulder. It was the hotel security guard. He advised me not to go further. I asked why, and he kept saying it wasn't safe at night. I spoke with a few other locals and learned that there was a frequent belief of shapeshifters appearing at night on the beach. Figures that seemed human but weren't and would appear one moment and disappear the next. The next day, we took a tour of the old town of Mombasa, where the famous Fort Jesus resides. We hired a local Muslim guide who took us on a walking tour of the town, showing us some of its amazing relics and historical buildings. It was a surreal experience being in a port city with a majority Muslim identity. At the end of the tour, I asked the real question I had suppressing for hours. What about these famous mgangas of Mombasa? I saw the smile on the face of the guide disappear as if I had said something blasphemous. What about them? He asked. I said I want to know more about them. Where do they live? He became very serious and turned towards and said, "Listen, brother, here we have two kinds of magic. The fake one, where you play card tricks on the street, and then there's the real black magic, which is done by spirits. There's an island off the coast where stories of magangas making people disappear are told very frequently. I can show you the card trick guys, but I will not take you to the real magicians. It's not safe. They are here, and they are also inhabiting these buildings you walk by. You can sometimes recognize where they stay by seeing the famous eye in the triangle sign on walls." I was amazed at the answer. I could not really believe I was there in the vicinity, and in fact I did see that triangle sign many times. Even though I didn't witness anything myself, I learned a lot about jinn during this trip. I learned the power these stories have over people. I saw the strong impressions that the concept of the supernatural had made on the local culture in Mombasa. Not one person did I meet from Mombasa except they had some kind of story. Overall, I grew in a lot of appreciation of the concept, and it only fueled my desire to learn more about it. In fact, I've returned to Mombasa once since, and intend on visiting many more times in the future. My family moved into a home in Mississauga, Canada in 2002. At the time we moved in, I was only 9 years old. The house was much larger than anything we had ever lived in before. It had 5 bedrooms at the time and 3 washrooms, plus a completely unfurnished basement. The first day we arrived, I remember being quite nervous of being in such a big place. I slept close to my mom and siblings. We had lived in a comfy and small home, but now it seemed like we lived in this mansion. Just a few weeks later, I became quite used to the home. You enjoy the extra space as a child, running around, kicking a ball up and down the hallway and playing hide and seek. However, I was always wary of going into the basement alone. It was dark, big, and completely made of cement. I once went down and found hooks hanging from the ceiling. It reminded me of a dungeon. Going down the stairs, there was just this rectangular area with two doors on opposite sides. I spoke to my dad about the hooks, and he very nonchalantly told me that the previous owners were caught by the police for growing marijuana, which at the time was illegal. The hooks were left there, and it reminded me of a darker history to the house. I quite liked that, though. It made things interesting. The basement was later renovated and became a beautiful and homey sitting and study area for us. I grew up in that house, went to high school and then university. A lot of my best memories were in that home. I started practicing Islam when I was about 15 years old, and my first topic of interest had always been Jinn. I found that when you start to study about Jinn, there are so many other topics that come up, and as a result, you end up learning a lot more than just the supernatural. I bought my first Jinn book, The Exorcist Tradition, by Bilal Phillips at the age of 15, and read it cover to cover, even memorizing certain texts. I heard Jinn stories from others and loved them. Sometimes I wondered if I'd ever experience something. Little did I know that one day it would happen in the very home I lived in. It was my second year of university, and after a tough exam season, I had gone out with a group of friends. When I came back home, my mom took me to the side and told me that a very disturbing and unusual incident occurred while I was gone. My sister was studying alone in a room in the basement with the door closed when suddenly she heard multiple loud bangs on the door. She ran upstairs in fright and told my parents what happened, and naturally they came down and told her that it was probably exam stress. She didn't buy it and said that the knocking on the door had come from inside the room. At this, even my dad, who has been the strongest man I've ever met, became quiet. No one seemed to have answer. While everyone was silent, trying to figure out a rational explanation, I went straight into the basement and started looking around. By the grace of Allah, I had memorized the Quran and had been asked to do ruqya at some points by other people, so my mom had asked me to do the same in the basement. As I expected, nothing popped up from the corners of the basement. I was disappointed. The story really did bother me. It made no sense. We moved on from this incident and brushed it under the carpet. I moved my stuff into the basement and slept there alone for months in hope I could see whatever was living down there. I even watched horror movies alone down there with the door closed. The Ring, The Babadook, The Exorcism, you name it. However, to my surprise, whatever was in our home would soon let us know that it hadn't gone anywhere. Later that year, we had bought a cat. My brother was reading Quran after Fajr in the basement and had brought the cat with him. While he was sitting on the floor reading, she was walking around him and sniffing the environment. While my brother was petting her, he heard a loud thud as if someone had kicked the cat on the side. She immediately jumped up in pain and became very scared. She even hissed and backed away in a corner. When I woke up, my brother explained what had happened, and I started seeing this as something more concerning. A few days later, we were all to take a family trip to the zoo, leaving the cat home alone for the first time. We were quite nervous about this. Just before leaving, we saw her act extremely strangely. In front of me, I saw her look at something on the basement door, and she made a face as if she tried to scream. She then just ran up and down in the most terrified manner I had ever seen. Over the years, things continued to happen. Nothing absolutely terrifying. No face ever popped up in the mirror, and no levitating body was seen in the dining room. It was these small occurrences. Things started to get weirder, and coming up with logical explanations was even more difficult. My first indirect interaction happened when I prayed to her in our family room. Between our family room and kitchen was one wall. After finishing my prayer, I left the room, but my brother was still inside. Suddenly, he ran out holding his beard and reciting Ayatul Kursi. He said that while he was sitting, he heard loud bangs come from the kitchen wall. He was visibly disturbed. A few days later, my youngest sister was sitting in the living room when the curtains were pulled apart to opposite sides of the wall in an aggressive fashion. There was no wind, and it was a dog-hot summer day. She ran out of the room and insisted that it was like a person physically pulled the curtains apart. Now, my family was on more of an alert, but nothing could prepare me for the next event. I was at university and came home to find my mom extremely scared. She said that while she was sleeping in the family room, she immediately had the feeling as if something was watching her from the door. She knew it wasn't a dream, it was real. She turned her eyes and saw a small boy standing and watching her. He quickly ran down the stairs into the darkness of the basement. She was too frightened to move, and suddenly she heard someone else walking up the basement steps. It wasn't one person though, it sounded like a group. When she turned around, she saw tall, slim figures wearing full black niqabs. They spoke to my mom and told her that they were Jinn living inside the home, and they wanted to apologize for the behavior of their son. "He is mischievous," they said. "He means well, but we can't control him, so I apologize for the fright he's caused. You won't hear from us again." My mom saw them go down the basement steps and disappear into the wall. I've never seen her so scared in my life. She said each figure was easily over 7 feet tall. I was speechless. "It's all those damn Jinn books you read, Umar," my mom said. She said that I always wanted an encounter, and now I got one. I won't lie, I was quite excited. I just wanted it to happen to me. My mom frequently said that when she woke up in the middle of the night to pray, she would hear rhythmic humming sounds coming from the basement, which sounded like Quran recitation. My father never believed her, but after Suhoor one Ramadan in 2014, she made him sit with her. He heard it too, and understandably, he was also speechless. I stayed awake all night one night, and whilst walking to get a glass of water, I also heard it. It was clear, rhythmic recitation, which did sound like Quran. It was a woman's voice. I was mesmerized. It was my first direct encounter with a jinn. I didn't want to disturb it, and I quickly left it in peace. I wasn't scared. I felt immense respect for whatever was reciting down there. It was as though Allah had shown me a sign that the supernatural does exist, and here it was, an unseen being reciting Quran to exalt the Creator at Fajr. Just wow. It was humbling. We didn't hear much after that. We thought it had long gone. But when I graduated from university in 2015, we heard from them one final time. I came home from work, and both my parents told me that the treadmill in the basement was running on its own. I was like, well, maybe it's a glitch? My mom smiled and said, "It's no glitch. The power cable wasn't even plugged in." At this, my heart stopped and my jaw dropped. Just as we were having this very conversation, we all heard the treadmill run. We stared in disbelief at each other, dropping our spoons to our plates, and became completely silent. When I regained some sense, I wanted to see it myself. I started going down the basement steps slowly, and whatever was running on it was running quite fast and loudly. Just as I approached the door, it stopped. I peeked into the room, and the power cable was in fact out. I couldn't help but laugh. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. My family since wonders where our housemates have gone. It's been 4 years and we haven't heard from them. Even though they did cause alarm to some members in our family, we all were quite honored to have them. We never played loud music in the basement or swore or showed any disrespect. We understood we shared a home with a God-fearing being. Looking back at that, I know none of us will ever forget it, and it will be something we will share with our future families. All praise be to Allah. I heard this story from my mother. True story, I believe. It's the thing that makes me think twice when I return a beggar empty-handed. Chills down my spine right now. So let's start from the beginning. My grandfather had a brother, cousin, maybe sibling. I don't know. Let's call him Dada. He was a very hard-working man. He always helped the poor. He was very kind to everyone. He had this positive attitude towards life. His wife, my grandmother, was very beautiful. I think that is why Dada married her. Since it was old times, my family lived together. My paternal grandfather, let's call him Bayd Dada, their sisters, all of them with so many kids in the house. Obviously, my dad was a kid. He had this great attachment with Dada. He even remembers his values and teachings now, which he occasionally teaches me to make me a better person. Okay, let's get back to the time it started. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Dada had a shop back then. I believe it was a bicycle repair shop. Dada was a very good person, but he hated people who could work and still begged around the city. He hated them. You know where this is going. There was this young man who could work hard and make a fortune. But there he was, begging for some paisas. He came to Dada's shop and started begging. Dada hated him so much, he never gave him anything. But that day was different. I don't know why he lost his mind. He scolded that beggar so bad that he ran from that place crying. Next thing, Dada's family couldn't find him anywhere in the city. Back then, no poor could afford to book a police case. So, days went by. Dada's family searched for him and they lost hope. They gave up. Dada left his wife and 3 kids behind and was nowhere to be found. Where was he? No one knew. Until one day, Dada heard a knock on the house door. "Who is it?" he shouted. It was a beggar who was asking for some food. "We don't have any food," said Dada, and shut the door. Then he froze, opened the door, and ran towards that beggar. He knew the beggar was someone familiar. It was Dada, right there in front of him. Dada was shocked and surprised, but he was happy that his brother was alive. He held his hand, dragged him in the house, and inquired and questioned him. Where was he? Why did he leave his family? To his surprise, Dada did not recognize Dada and no one from the family. After this incident, Dada was seen a few more times in that area. But Dada couldn't let his brother go, so he decided to follow him one day. As he followed him through the city, Dada arrived to a land where the beggars had camped. He was surrounded by the beggars who knew exactly why Dada was there. They told him to forget his brother and leave. But how could he? So he decided to come back again the next day. He went there now with a mushaf in his pocket. The beggars told him to remove the mushaf and then talk to him. No idea how they got to know about the mushaf. Then came a lady who was supposedly the wife of Dada. As she approached, all the others stepped back. There was something wrong with her. Everyone was afraid of her. Dada asked her what will she take to let Dada go. She was not there for a deal. She was there to warn Dada to forget about Dada. Dada was nowhere to be seen. Dada warned, requested, begged. He did everything but to no success. During the conversation, she was always staring at the pocket. Dada took the mushaf out and she vanished, just disappeared in thin air. Dada saw Dada lying on the ground in a nearby tent. Dada recognized him but refused to go. Dada asked him why. He told him that the woman who was supposedly Dada's wife is actually a black magician. She is too strong to be dealt with. She can disappear and fly, and also she could kill anyone like they died of natural causes. So Dada was not going anywhere. He was afraid that if he left this woman, she might kill all of his family. Now the reason why Dada was kidnapped by this woman was, remember the young beggar whom Dada scolded? That man was this woman's brother. It was a revenge for hurting him. So, Dada went back home, tried to connect with many guys who could deal with this woman, but everyone refused to. So Dada lived with that woman all his life. After Dada's death, his body was found in front of Dada's house. They gave him a burial. So that's the story. But wasn't it a story of jinns? Yes, it is. Black magic cannot be done without the help of jinns. So that woman was a jinn or had jinns. That how she abducted Dada. That's how his memory was wiped. That's how they all knew there was mushaf in the pocket. It was very hot the day Sumaiya's father came home with the book. Of course, this book has a name, but nobody ever says it out loud. It's like poison to the mouth. Sumaiya remembers watching her father after all her younger siblings went to sleep, huddled and packed together in a single bedroom like wolf pups in winter. Her father's long face was painted with shadows from the candles spread around the room as he read from the borrowed book. His cynical mind took on his friend's challenge, searching for proof that the book was not just paper and ink. He read it every night After her mother's usual dinner of smoked red peppers, onions cooked until black, tender lamb from their farm, all on a bed of tomato-soaked rice. Her father did this for 3 nights. On the 3rd night, a knock came at the door. He glanced up from his reading. Sumaya heard a wail from behind and found all 6 of her siblings had awoken. A cool breeze kissed her cheeks and blew strands of dark curls around her face that tickled like veiny tendrils. Every candle blew out except for one. She went to stand beside it for comfort. When she turned back around, the door was opened by her father. Grasshopper songs traveled louder than normal into the tiny hut they called home. A man taller than 10 of her stood outside, blocking the night with his presence. He wore a white thobe, so white it hurt to look at. A very long broadsword was strapped around his waist. It reached from the tip of his left shoulder to what seemed like many miles below it, an inch from licking the sandy ground. Her father's sleepy eyes got wide. Sumaya thought he looked like the lamb did before they had slaughtered it for dinner earlier that evening. "You should not have done that," the man at the door told her father. His voice was soft and dark like a bruise. Before anyone could blink, Sumaya and her siblings were sitting in a perfect circle. Her youngest brother, Ahmed, still too young to eat and pee by himself, sat on her lap. She didn't remember moving. Their eyes were smoothly glazed over like left-out butter. A bead of sweat trickled down her neck. Sumaya yawned. When she looked down again, Ahmed had vanished. Her mother ran into the room screaming and beating her father with a sandal, shrieking again and again, "Give me back my child! Give me back my child!" "Please, oh please," her father begged. His back arched like a frightened cat when the man made a move for his sword. The man looked down at them all for a full minute. The only things heard were their breathing and the grasshopper's deafening melody from outside. The single, defiant candle still flickered in the darkness like it was belly dancing. The thought made Sumaya giggle. Everyone turned to her, even the giant man. After a moment, the man rumbled, "Your son is in the bushes outside. Take him. And then, never read that book again. You're lucky I was the one who heard you and not one of the others." "Thank you, thank you, thank you," her father promised with his entire prostrated body. Sumaya understood everything even though she was only 8 years old. This was one of the nice Jinn. She had heard stories about these beings with incredible powers created from fire and smoke. A classmate of hers once informed everyone that they could be easily influenced when done correctly. He claimed his fortune-telling gypsy of a mother had one of her own, not without consequences they would soon learn. Why? What could they possibly do for you? She had asked that day, and her classmate had told them. Sumaya wasn't scared anymore. She got up and on impulse, tugged on the man's robe. Its incredible softness felt like she was tugging on a butterfly's wing. The man looked down at her. His face was too far up to see, cast in shadows. The man, sensing something in her intentions, stepped back and disappeared into the night as quickly as he had come. The next day, her father buried the book and the family never again spoke about what had occurred. A few years later, on a similarly hot night, Sumaya felt enough courage to recover the crumbled, torn-out pages of an old book her father had once held. This time, when her door opened, bringing with it the sound of nocturnal insects and desert wind, she didn't cower behind a candle. Instead, she smiled and took hold of the long, dark hand that reached out for her. Superstition, like curly hair and an affinity for kayak cookies with labneh spread on top, runs through my blood. From my mother's habit of refusing to leave the house without consulting her trusty pocket Quran, to my father refusing to leave my freshman dorm room on my first day of college without pasting protective duas above the door, to my sisters and I never removing to take off the Nazar necklaces gifted to us on our first trip to Lebanon. Superstition is practically embedded in my genome. But no one, and I mean no one, wholly believes in the supernatural as much as my grandmother's sister. The moment that you stepped into her ornately decorated home, you were immediately greeted by the flowing script of Ayat ul Kursi, The verse in the Quran meant to ward off against evil and protect one from evil spirits, mounted within a large, gilded frame. Evenings spent at my aunt's house were not without at least a handful of Jinn stories. My sisters and cousins would sit around her, enraptured as this wizened old woman would weave tales of evil jinns that tricked or confused unknowing men and women, and the few that outsmarted them. This is one of them. Now, this one is from back before my husband and I immigrated here to America, back from when I was still in school. I wanted to be an archaeologist, to go to Egypt and walk through the Valley of Kings, to study the pyramids of the pharaohs, to imagine what it must have been like back in those days. But that is another story. She paused, taking a sip of Ceylon tea in a crystal glass, resting the cup between her gnarled fingers. There was a girl in my class, Samira was her name. Her father sold spices in the souk, the market. Anyways, Samira had told me this story of a friend of her mother's. Now this woman, Aisha, had once poured hot water down the drain without saying Bismillah. We all know why this is incorrect, right, children? Our heads bobbed in agreement. One was to never pour hot water down the drain without giving the jinn a warning. This was a code of ethics, a mutual respect humans were to have for the jinn. So, Aisha's mother had walked into her daughter once she was done pouring the water. And Aisha's mother was a smart woman and a good mother, and she was alarmed that the jinn had already begun to take root in her. And because she was such a good mother, she immediately took her daughter to see the local hafiz, a man who was learned in the Quran. And so they went. The holy man had examined Aisha and told her that the jinn had, indeed, already possessed her daughter. This last bit was emphasized with dramatic pause, a tactic which had accomplished its purpose. Several "ohs" rang through the room. My aunt, pleased with the reaction, took another sip of her tea, satisfaction playing on her lips as she set the cup down and continued her tale. So, the Hafiz went into his room and came back with a familiar blue charm, the Nazar, on a silver necklace. He blessed this charm and prayed over it, before pressing it into Aisha's hands. He told her, "As long as you wear this charm, you shall remain forever protected from bad luck." Aisha wore that necklace every single day after that. But something curious occurred. The Hafiz was correct. While bad luck never befell Aisha's life, it almost would, and more than once, mind you. A missed taxicab that would crash on the highway hours later, an engagement that would fall through, only for the knowledge of his infidelity to come to light after the rings had been returned, a rejection for a visa that would allow her to stay with her sick grandmother before her death. Our parents were standing to leave, beginning the lengthy ritual of goodbyes. Coats were sneakily put on, then taken off at the bequest of my great-aunt's daughters, who took great offense at this perceived slight. Coats went on, then off. Our parents called to us, but we paid them no mind. Our great-aunt waved a hand, shushing our parents in their attempt to steal us away before the end of the story. Now, Aisha had continued her life. She had married, had children, had a beautiful home near the coast. Her children would stretch tales like palm sap, whispering stories to the neighborhood children about the jinn that lived in her home. A dark shadow that would stand in the doorway as you washed your face in the morning, a dirty kitchen that would magically become clean when you woke up in the morning, a cold hand gripping your shoulder as you reached for the book at the top shelf. And while these stories were mostly fibs related by Aisha's children to gain an ounce of notoriety among the other children, they did not come from nothing. Aisha's home held a feeling of dread, a cold air, a presence that was not of this world. Friends commented on it, but Aisha waved it off to external sources. Her husband had kept the fans on too long. Her mother-in-law had come to visit. The winds from the sea had blown too fiercely the night before. Still, she wore the necklace, and bad things had almost occurred to her, her children. Missing days of school only to not catch whatever miasma had been crawling around the playground. A late trip to the market meant she would miss the fresh cherry tomatoes, but did not catch the rotten eggplants that filled the air with their stench. A power outage meant her maddening sisters-in-law canceled their visit. This continued on and on throughout Aisha's life. She had grown to be an old, old woman, outliving her husband and her two eldest children. Her bones had grown weary, her eyesight poor. Her life had been full, long, and happy, her home filled with children, with generations who had grown up within the four walls of the house she had helped to build. So, one day, before she had gone to bed, she took off the necklace. The next morning she was discovered, hands folded neatly across her chest, lying in an eternal sleep. The local doctor had said she had died of pneumonia. Some say that she had a great conversation with the Jinn, but my great-aunt stood up suddenly, resting her weight on her cane. That is just a story. My grandfather was an educated man. Born around the First World War, he left Karachi in British India and came back 5 years later with a chemistry PhD to Karachi, Pakistan. He was a non-believer, someone who did not believe anything he couldn't touch, feel, or independently verify. From an early age, he rejected all religion and superstitions. He was also a man honest to a fault, not the type of man to casually make up the story I retell below. It was sometime in the 1950s. My grandfather and his family had one of the few cars in Karachi and all of Pakistan. He and his best friend Ahmed had gone hunting in interior, Sindh for boar, or driving back home late at night. This was Pakistan, and this was the 1950s, so they weren't on a paved road, and they let the distant lights of Karachi, the only city which enjoyed electricity for miles, guide them home. My grandfather was driving, and his best friend was in the passenger seat. They'd been quiet for a while when they saw in the distance, just ahead of them, a strange light. As they got closer, they saw it was a person. As they got closer, they realized it was a woman. As they got closer, they saw she was in all white. As they got closer, they saw that she was limping. And as they got closer, they saw that her dress was torn and that she was covered in blood. There wasn't a settlement for miles. My grandfather and Ahmed were worried that this woman had been attacked, or worse. So my grandfather started slowing the car, and Ahmed started to roll down the window to talk to her when he suddenly grabbed my grandfather's arm and started yelling, "Jai-ha! Jai-ha! Jai-ha!" he screamed. "Geo, go, go!" In his panic, my grandfather floored it, and as he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the apparition. Her face was white, he told me 60 years later. Her mouth was twice as large as it should have been, and it was covered in blood. Her eyes were twice as large as they should have been, and they were completely black. There wasn't a pupil, and her hair was frayed and burnt, and her feet. I can't believe this. Her feet were turned backwards, and she ran after us. I went 20 miles an hour, 30, 40, 50, and she kept pace until eventually she tired and gave up. But I could hear her yelling. I could hear her yelling blasphemies against God and his prophet for miles and miles. My mother remembers him coming home that night shaken and unable to speak. Ahmed spent the night in prayer and only left when the sun came up. When asked what they saw, the two men disagreed, despite his secularism. My grandfather swore it was a jinn, an apparition, but Ahmed said that it was a Pichel Peri, a backwards-footed woman, who pretended to need help and then preyed upon the good men who tried to help her. My grandfather was a good, kind, honest man who never turned down someone who needed help. But he would caution us, if you ever see a woman who needs help, he would say, always make sure to look at her feet. We've all heard the stories. If you're Muslim, it goes something like this. My grandmother once told me that in her grandmother's village back in Pakistan, there was a lone, abandoned mansion at the end of town. Yes, I'm talking about Jinn, basically ghost stories. We all grew up with them, traded them, and transmitted them. And yet, weirdly enough, they always happened to some friend's distant relative back in a faraway country, or to an uncle who, for some odd reason, was at the masjid in the middle of the night 30 years ago and saw the vacuum cleaner flying around by itself. Shout out to any Jinn janitors out there keeping the mosques clean. Never did it happen right in front of our eyes here in America. So, while I believed in Jinn themselves and enjoyed the entertainment of a campfire Jinn story, I had a very hard time believing these stories actually happened. Until, that is, the stories happened to me. I never realized how dark it could get with zero light pollution. It was like a pitch-black blanket covered everything that should have been in sight. I could barely make out the shadows of objects right in front of me. With nothing to do in this blinding darkness, I settled onto the sleeping bag strewn across the floor of the enormous foreign students' Ambar House tent. While at times this Ambar housed as many as 7 people, now no other students were here. I was alone. My sleep came in fits and bursts. Exhaustion battled the uncomfortableness of sleeping on a concrete floor. I was asleep 1 minute, awake the next, and then asleep again. Suddenly, my eyes snapped open. In the darkness, I saw a man standing in the corner, leaning on the back wall as if he were waiting for me. I couldn't make out his exact figure, except that he was skinny, with a turban and a thin beard. I briefly considered whether I was still asleep, but no, I was definitely awake. This was no doubt my Mbar that I saw around me. This was no doubt the stiff concrete floor that I felt underneath me. I fixed my eyes on this man's shadowy figure. He seemed to notice I was looking because he acknowledged my stare with a curt nod, then immediately began walking over. I couldn't move. I was too paralyzed by fear to do anything more than just lay there and watch as he came closer, closer. Then, as soon as he reached the edge of my sleeping bag, he passed right around and straight out the tent. This was ridiculous. I had been warned that the Mauritanian villagers don't have much of a sense of privacy and walk into your tent without asking, but this, to barge into my tent in the middle of the night, then stroll out without saying a word. No, sir. This was too much. I grabbed the flashlight beside me, beamed it onto the man just as he was leaving, and hot on his tail, ran out to confront him. This creepster would not get away with his intrusion. Now outside, I swung around my light, searching for the direction he went off to. Left, right, straight ahead. Again and again, I swung my light around. But there was no one there. No man, not even a trace. Confused and still exhausted, I went back to sleep mumbling the Ayat-ul-Kursi. The next day was a blur of studying, reading, eating, and daydreaming about a sweet, cold can of Coca-Cola that would never come, and before I knew it, the sun was setting once again. This time, as night inched closer, it brought with it a feeling of extreme dread. I thought of confiding in someone about what I had seen the night before, but the Mauritanians had already deemed me not enough of a man, and I wasn't going to ruin my image further by running over and crying about Jinn. So, I tried the only other strategy I could think of: stay awake the whole night. Needless to say, that strategy didn't work. Again, exhaustion from the extreme heat overcame me, and I laid down to sleep. Again, my sleep was restless. 1 minute I was awake, the next minute dreaming a terrible dream, and then awake again. Towering over me, I could make out the figure of someone I knew and disliked very, very much. But the situation didn't make any sense. This person I so disliked was supposed to be halfway across the world in America. But here they were standing over my head in a tiny remote village in Mauritania. I stared up in shock. He glowered down at me. I grabbed my booklight from beside me and shined it on his face, hoping it would repel him. It didn't. Unfazed, he continued staring down a menacing stare. I leapt up from my sleeping bag. Stumbling backwards, I turned my light on him, ready for whatever confrontation was necessary. If he pursued me to this middle-of-nowhere village at this ungodly hour, then I couldn't just let him go. But there was no confrontation. Whoever was standing right over me 1 second ago had vanished into thin air. More frightened than I'd ever been in my life, I looked longingly in the direction of Murabit's house, where I had stayed the first night in Toué Marat. It would be so much more comfortable to stay there, sleeping close to the sheikh and his family. Surely no Jinn would dare come there. But I held back. I must not seem like a scaredy cat, I told myself. I must not seem afraid. A month or two passed without any more visits from these apparitions. Even so, I remained a little scared and always on edge. The Mauritanians continued to frighten me with various stories of Jinn. They said, for instance, one lonely night, a student had been sitting at the cell phone spot, about a mile away from the village, casually browsing his phone when he felt a pebble thrown at him. He ignored it. Probably another villager playing a prank, he thought. Then, as he continued browsing, he felt someone sit beside him. He glanced up from his phone. Beside him was a strange man with a horribly distorted and ugly face grinning widely. The stranger had never before been seen around these parts, and he was never seen again. The story was probably more fiction than fact, but it was more than enough to frighten me. Every time I walked off alone to the cell phone spot around 3 a.m. and heard a wolf howling, the wind whooshing, or a stone dropping down the mountain, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I thought back to the incredible fear I had of the jinns here, and realized my sense of fear did indeed stem from a weaknesses in faith. I had been programmed to fear way more than what was natural. Fear has become an industry. Haunted houses, roller coasters, horror movies, thrillers. And like any industry, what started as something grounded in reality has been taken to an extreme in the pursuit of more. We have been taught to fear everything and anything. We used to fear just the monster with a hideous face. Now we fear a little girl coming out of a TV. We used to fear just the masked killer man. Now we fear the possessed killer baby. What used to be a natural reaction to the unnatural became an unnatural reaction to the irrational, a freakish excitement, a passing thrill. The ultimate believer does not fear Jinn, because even if that Jinn stood a hair's breadth from him and was the most hideous creature he'd ever seen, what could the Jinn do without the permission of God? The ultimate believer does not fear another man, because what could that man do without the permission of God? The ultimate believer does not fear a crowd. He does not fear loneliness. He does not fear an oppressor. He does not fear poverty. He does not fear torture. He does not fear death. He does not fear anything but the most overwhelming master of the universe. What an amazing, incredibly empowering fear that is. Only 2 weeks remained now till I returned to America. My back had become used to the concrete floor and my eyes to the darkness that enveloped everything. For months now, I had never seen or heard anything out of the ordinary, until when one middle of the night, I gradually awoke. From behind me, I could hear the sound of pouring water. It was almost as if someone had opened the giant carton of water I stored in my M-bar, tilted it over ever so slightly, and was filling their jug, slowly. Someone had come into my tent this late at night and is pouring out my water? Impossible. It must be a cow urinating just outside, as they so often did, or surely I must be hallucinating. 10 seconds passed. The sound of pouring water continued. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Cows do not urinate this long. 1 minute. I was definitely wide awake and not hallucinating now. I could clearly make out that the sound of pouring water came from only 2 or 3 feet behind me, precisely where I had left my giant carton of water before going to bed. At that very moment, I was almost certain that had I turned around, I would have seen a figure standing right behind me, pouring out the water. But I didn't turn around. There was no need. Instead, I smiled and thought back to the chapter I had read. Fear of anything besides God is from a weakness of faith. It was almost like God was testing me. I laughed, settled back into bed, and slept like a baby. The man who fears nothing but God has nothing but God to fear. Thanks for spending your time here. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, feel free to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.